word for banca, a table, and you would set out the table, and they would bring your chickens and goats and whatever else you had, and you would put it on the table, and they would give you coins, and then you would take that coins and you deposit it in the temple. And the other people who needed money were these long-distance merchants, people who were trading. Right, you can't bring your chicken 100 miles to go get spices, thousands of miles, to get spices in India or silks or whatever other type of luxury goods you had, trinkets, seashells, pearls, things of that sort. So you have kind of two separate societies, one that needs money because they're doing transactions or because the services they're doing require that you have, a type of money economy, but most of us didn't need it. We were in a local economy, we could get everything we want locally, and we could do very simple barter transactions. So down here you would have your barter exchanges, and up here you might have money exchanges, essentially. So this is what kind of how the world existed until the Industrial Revolution. And I want to pause here and just talk about some basic functions of money. This is a very standard definition. What does money do? What exactly does it allow us to do? The first one is that it's a medium of exchange, which means it's a lowest common denominator. Okay, not everyone wants, let's say, you can always get two people who want to exchange the things, right? Just because I want to have chicken tonight doesn't mean the person who's raising the chickens wants to buy, the toys that I'm making, or the plow that I'm making, or if I'm a blacksmith, right? They don't have a horse that needs shoes on it. And so there's not always going to be a match. But if you have money, right, everyone can convert what they produce into money, right? Just like we work, and we get a paycheck. And this money is the lowest common denominator, because then we can, let's say, instead of trading like 1/4 of a cow for one chicken, you can turn both of that into money, and it allows for an efficient transaction, and allows you to trade among people who don't know each other, right? You don't need to live in these small agricultural village societies. You can have transactions among anonymous individuals, and you can also trade in diverse products. You don't have to do one-on-one exchanges. You can do very complex exchanges relatively easy. So basically money is this medium of exchange that allows us to change one thing for another. The other thing money is a store of value. And this means that money can preserve value over time. And the Romans had a saying, and I'm not a Latin scholar, so I'm going to mispronounce this, pecunia non olet, which means money does not stink. And you might think of this that money might be filthy, but basically it doesn't rot, and so it doesn't stink. Compared to a lot of other things that we're producing, money doesn't take, we don't have to preserve it, we don't have to feed it like an animal or a cow. It's not like milk that's going to go bad in 2 weeks. And this allows us to preserve this value over time. So things that we earn today, we can spend in later periods. So we can also then do things like borrow from the future. Many of you are going to be going to college, and you're going to borrow money. Now, if it was based on your current income, no one would ever lend you money because you're poor high school students. No one's going to write you a $200,000 check so you can go to college for 4 years. But because you have a future income, right, you're going to go to college and make more money, and you'll probably make a lot more money. What you can do is borrow. People will give you credit. I know you'll be able to pay back this money eventually, and so you're able to borrow money from your future income and use it today to pay for your college expenses. You can also do things like work now and spend later. And this is basically what retirement is, right? People work for 40, 50 years, save up for retirement, and then they can spend that money later when they're 65, 70 years old, go live at a resort, etc. So you can kind of send that money to the future. You don't have to be constantly working at the same time that you're consuming or spending your money. But the problem here, and we'll get into this more later, is that there can be intertemporal, which means there can be imbalances over time. Intertemporal supply and demand imbalances. Because, let's say, people's demand, I could spend the money now, I could spend the money later. Okay, demand could be now or it could be later. which means that I might not have enough demand now for what's being supplied or being made. And the same thing with supply. I might want to, let's say, make things now or make things later. So when I'm investing, I'm saying, well, I'm not going to make things now. I might save this money and use it at a later point in time when I have a better opportunities or I want to spend it. And this function really unbalances the supply and demand dynamics, because not everyone has to spend their money now, which means that there's a possibility that supply and demand will not match up. There might be more supply than demand, there might be more demand than supply, and this can have perverse effects on the quantities produced in the economy and also the levels of prices. The last thing that money does is that it's a unit of account, which means that money is basically a scorecard. And there's a lot of things that we have to put prices on that really are difficult to put on a price. And I mentioned before, let's say the clergy. What exactly is a priest worth? They pray, it makes us feel good, they're nice people, but they don't actually make anything that we can buy and sell in a market. We need to put a price on something like that. You maybe think of your bank accounts. Those are just electronic numbers saying you have such and such amount of money here, but there's not actually, let's say, money in the bank. There's not like piles of cash or hoards of gold in the bank standing behind saying, oh, you can pull this out at any time. And so money allows us to kind of, let's say, keep track of things like notional things that are not tangible, things that are not strictly goods. A lot of things that are services can actually be now accounted for in money. And we'll talk about later that actually money lets us make commodities out of things that are not really commodities, such as land, labor, money, ideas, etc. So let me just give you an example of one of these first, what barter exchange is. It's exchanging of things for other things. And so let's say we have a primitive village and we have our three gentlemen here. We have Alex, Andrew, and Anthony. And they can't get along because they all want something different than what they're selling. What the people who want what they're selling don't have the things that they want to buy. So for example, Alex wants chickens, but he's selling grain. Or Andrew wants cows and sells chickens. And Anthony wants grain and he's selling cows. And we might think what the relative value is, that one chicken equals 4 bushels of grain and one cow equals 7 bushels of grain. So what can happen here? Well, let's say we start with Andrew here, right? He wants cows, but the person who has cow wants grain. So what he might do is he might sell his chickens to Alex. So let's say one chicken is worth 4 grain, so he sends one chicken and he gets 4 grain back, and another chicken and he gets 4 more grain, and a third chicken and he gets now 12 bushels of grain. Now he wasn't able to sell all his chickens, but he sold some of them, and now he has enough grain, and he turns around and says, look, now I have 12 bushels of grain, give me a cow. And so he gives 7 grain to Anthony, Anthony gives him a cow, and Anthony also got the grain that he wanted. Right? So what we have here is that we made an exchange, but it's not really that efficient. Because if you look at these yellow areas, right, Anthony had 2 more cows that he wanted to sell, and now he has to take those cows home and feed those cows and take care of them. They might be valuable, but now he has to expend a lot more money taking care of those cows. And Andrew just wanted cows, but he still has some of his chickens that he wasn't able to sell. He has extra grain that he didn't want, and so he has to store that. The rats might get to it, it might, let's say, perish or rot away, and he has to continue feeding his chickens. Now Alex got chickens, but he wasn't able to sell all his grain. So this is kind of what happens in a barter system, is that it's a little bit inefficient unless you want to make some assumptions, or some people want to be more generous than others. But basically, you don't get efficient transactions in a barter system. So let's look at an exchange with money involved. So we now have 3 smarter ladies here. We have Amanda, Abigail, and Alyssa. And 1 chicken equals 4 grain. 1 cow equals 7 grain, just like before. But 1 grain is also equal to 1 unit of currency, or let's say in this case, $1. So let's say what Abigail can do. She can sell her chickens, and she gets money back. Okay? Amanda can sell her grain, and she'll get money back. and Alyssa can sell the cows and get money. And what they can do now is, just like we do in normal transactions today, right? I can turn my money into things I want. So Abigail turns her money into cows, Alyssa turns her money into grain, and Amanda turns her money into chickens. Now you can see that no one's holding stuff that they don't want, right? They don't have to feed any animals they don't want. They don't have to store the grain that they no longer have a use for. They don't have to feed chickens or animals. And what they do have left over is, let's say, a little bit of money. So Alyssa has $6 left over, and Abigail has another $6 left over, and Amanda has $3 left over. And remember, money does not stink. That money will be there tomorrow, and they can take that and put it in their wallet, and that's a lot easier to store than, let's say, storing lots of goods and services that you can't sell. And so money made this a lot more efficient than it was in the other transaction. Now, that's just saying that, we're given something, we're getting something up. And in most of conventional economics, this is, the kind of idea of no free lunch, right? You give something, you get something. You get something, you give something. But the exchanges are basically zero sum. So here we have this diagram with, two people. Someone has a red apple, another person has a green apple. The person with the green apple wants the red apple, the person with the red apple wants the green apple. And so they just engage in exchange. So I give you something and then you give me something back. But basically, there's no increase overall, all right? We've just switched things around. We've had an exchange of two equally valuable things, and, we've called it even. That's one way to think about it. Another thing, though, is that, and this is what we might call, what really happens when we are exchanging things, we're not just exchanging the material products, but everything we exchange has like an idea built into it. So, for example, when we manufacture things such as axes or knives or sewing needles or scissors or something like that, they come with kind of an idea attached, because we might be making different types of axes, different types of needles, different types of sewing machines, and we can see what other people are making, and this doesn't have to be zero sum. You might call this, we have sex for ideas here, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. And this allows us to have the second principle in economics, which is sometimes the whole is greater than the parts. So if I have an idea and you have an idea, and we share our ideas, or we exchange our ideas, we're not just left with I have one idea and you have one idea. In fact, we have both ideas, right? I have my own idea that I had originally, and plus whatever you had, and I can combine those, and that means we have, let's say, more than we had in the past. And this means this can make the economy grow. Now, let me just say this is what you might call, as I said, sex for ideas. And you can see here the two light bulbs, kissing. And that's what happens to our ideas when we engage in shopping or exchange. We're able to see things and combine the two elements of our previous ideas and make better decisions than we did before. So let's just look at this for a simple invention. So let's say we start with two very primitive axes. Okay, you can see that we have two poles, and then we try to tie or suspend some type of rock, relatively primitive. So here we have tying with some twine or sinew or something of that sort, and then we have another split piece of wood held together with honey